Well, hello. We are back. Hammer, Jay Helmer, welcome back to me, to me. I'm back from vacation. We got started, and even last week I was like, oh no, I didn't actually schedule this the right way. So it was a little bit of a scramble. I was on vacation, Disney World, but now we're back this week, and it's Thanksgiving weekend, which means it's a smaller week in the world of banking, and statistically speaking, historically, statistically speaking, markets do well heading up to Thanksgiving, and then they kind of hold their breath to see what happens in retail industry. And I know we're not talking, you know, stock and bonds primarily in this call, but we see markets kind of be hopeful for spending when it comes to the Friday after Thanksgiving, and then we'll see what happens. But I'm kind of curious. What do you got thinking? I'm going to share your screen here, but what's happening last week, this week, and going forward?
Awesome. So great to have you back, Nathan. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's kind of start with something you said, and then we'll bounce around and work backwards from there. But you mentioned that historically things are quiet heading into the holiday. Actually, pretty good for interest rates usually that Wednesday before the holiday, and the reason for that is because mortgage rates, as we've discussed in the past, are based on the performance of mortgage bonds. And bonds tend to do well right before that holiday because investors are parking money in bonds, just kind of keeping it warm. And that way they can take the whole long weekend. And they usually will leave midday on Wednesday, and they're usually gone for Friday. Now, the bond market is, of course, closed on Thursday, as is the stock market. The bond market is closed early on Friday. And it doesn't close early on Wednesday in a formal fashion, but usually things are quiet by the middle of the day. And this week, it's a little different than normal because of the environment that we're in. So if you throw that screen up, if you don't mind, and I'm going to go ahead and show, I'll show, we'll bounce back and take a look at what happened last week, but let's start with what we think is going to happen this week. And we'll keep talking about specifically about what we're going to see on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, we're going to get a lot of economic data. And specifically, there's going to be the personal consumption expenditure, which is the only, you don't have to worry too much about what it is. It's an inflation report. And the reason it's so important is because it's the inflation gauge that the Fed gives the most attention to. And all of the attention right now with rates is about the Fed and the central bank and what actions they're going to take as far as tapering back bond purchases, which is what they've been doing to keep rates low. And we've talked about that in the past, but a quick refresher for anybody is the Fed has been helping to keep mortgage rates low because they're buying the back end mortgage bonds and they're keeping a demand. So as long as they keep an appetite for that and they keep a demand, as lenders are doing more and more loans and selling these into what we call the secondary market, there's a demand for those loans, and that helps keep mortgage rates low. That's kind of the gist of it. So, but recently in the last Fed meeting at the end of October, actually, I think it was right into the 1st of November. So the third of November, I'm looking at the wrong month here. Yeah, it was the 3rd of November. So at this month's meeting, the Fed said, hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start reducing our purchase of mortgage bonds as well as treasuries. And that's going to kind of start that cycle of easing rates higher. And we expected to see a little bit of a stronger reaction to that news than we did, because back in 2013, when the Fed did that, it was a really big deal. They called it the taper tantrum, and the Fed was not quite as forthcoming about their activities like they are today. They're very transparent now. They're trying not to unsettle the markets. So they're kind of forecasting and foretelling really what actions they're going to take. So the Fed has come out and said, okay, well, we're looking to make these moves with bond tapering. We're going to do this through the middle of next year. And what everybody is then anticipating is once the Fed makes the move where they start to reduce their bond purchases, that's going to progress. And when they're done, then they'll look at, okay, now we want to go ahead and raise rates. Now, why did I start talking about all of this? Because when the Fed raises rates, why would the Fed want to raise rates? Well, that's where it kind of cycles back. The Fed would raise rates because they want to fight inflation. So every time that we get this inflationary report, like we're going to get on Wednesday, and it talks about what inflation is doing, that's something that investors tend to look at and say, okay, if inflation comes in very high, that could cause the Fed to maybe speed up their timetable. There's already talk that the Fed, instead of taking about 8 months to reduce their tapering down to zero, will maybe do that faster, which would open the door for what they call liftoff, which is their slang for, hey, we're going to start raising interest rates. And when they raise interest rates, they don't have a button on mortgage rates, by the way, for anybody watching. The Fed does not set mortgage rates, but what they do set is the Fed funds rate. And sometimes it's very confusing on why this one interest rate, this Fed funds rate, the rate that banks lend each other money overnight, why this is such an important rate. But that's a whole nother conversation. The takeaway is that it's a very important rate. And it's kind of the basis where a lot of other rates will then move from. So the Fed isn't going to say, okay, mortgage rates are going to go from 3.25% to 3.5%. But what they will do is they can control that Fed funds rate. And then that will trickle through all of the other different interest rates out there, including mortgage rates, and kind of push them up. So this week, even though we're talking about what would happen all the way in 2022, where it starts with a report that we get on Wednesday, and that's going to be that personal consumption expenditures report. That's the inflation gauge that the Fed uses. So we could see some volatility from that, and that's going to be one of the things. The second thing's going to happen on Wednesday in the afternoon is we're going to get the meeting minutes from that Fed meeting that was just a couple of weeks ago, and investors tend to look at those meeting minutes with a fine-tooth comb. They go word by word, and they're looking for signals of what may happen sooner than they expect, or what actions the Fed may take. So those are going to be a little bit of they'll get a little bit more attention on Wednesday afternoon, right before everybody kind of takes the rest of the week off, if you will, at that point, and kind of disappears. So that's why this Wednesday could be more volatile than normal, because of all of the economic data, including we also get initial jobless claims, which have basically that's unemployment. Who's applying for unemployment, and the unemployment is normally, those reports come out on Thursday. Well, Thursday is Thanksgiving, so this one will be out on Wednesday. So we've got a lot of data coming out on Wednesday that could kind of shake things up a little bit. So a lot of talking, but the bottom line could be a little more volatile is, the takeaway there. Anything you want to add? Questions, comments?
Maybe I should take myself off mute. Let's start with that. There's a couple different components to that whole thing, which is that you see, and I appreciate you brought this up, the Fed fund rate, the Fed rate, does not directly direct mortgage rates. However, banks and the ability to borrow and lend money, and what that applies to even the 10-year bond, the Treasury bond, and the LIBOR, and all those things. That will affect it, and we could expect to see it go up. And again, that's in kind of reaction to inflation and what's happening out there. So if somebody was looking to lock their interest rate, and because they're in the middle of a transaction, a lot of times what we tend to say, and what is usually said, is go with what you know, unless you're a big risk taker, and you might, maybe you could wait, see what happens, but go with what you know is usually a common thing I hear that's said, especially around the holidays.
Right. And, there's definitely, by the way, LIBOR, you're showing your experience. LIBOR is no more. There is no.
I know. I said that. I don't know if you looked. I looked off the side. I was like, oh no, that's actually gone now.
Yeah, right. It's funny for those that don't know. That's just because Nathan and I have been in the industry for so long, and it was such a stalwart. It was a very, very prominent index that was used for a lot of mortgages, and it's since been changed over. But anyway, yeah, I mean, you're 100% correct. There's certain times when we can look at what's going on in the news, in the headlines. We call those the fundamentals. So you can say, okay, what's going on in the investment world, and is it going to help mortgage rates improve? And there's sometimes that it's almost just too easy. We can say, you know what, there are things going on right now. Mortgage rates are going to improve, and we wouldn't want to lock in interest rates because you could be leaving money on the table, especially depending on when your loan closes. And, as a general rule of thumb, if your loan is closing sooner, let's say your loan closes between now and the next 2 weeks from now, right before that first week of December, you need to be more careful because everything moves in cycles, but you don't have time for things to get worse and get better and get worse and get better. So you need to kind of be a little more conservative and quicker to lock in that interest rate and protect what you have. When you've got more time on your hands, especially if you are finding a scenario where you're building a home. In the vetted VA group, I see a lot of consumers today that are building homes, and you may not be able to lock in an interest rate until later on. And that may concern you. And you're saying, well, hey, I don't want to see rates go up. Well, there's times that we say you definitely don't want to lock in because we have a very clear path to improvement. And then there's times where you say you need to lock in if you can, because we have a very clear path that things are probably going to get a little bit worse. But most of the time, like what we're looking at right now, we go a little bit up, we go a little bit down, we go a little bit up, we go a little bit down. And that's really where we're at. So if you're closing in the next couple of weeks, it's not a bad idea to take what's in front of you and run with it. Heading into the holiday, we could see things get a little bit better, but also lenders tend to get conservative. Everybody's closed on Thursday. Most lenders are not going to issue new rate sheets on Friday. Their lock desks, their departments, their operation staff are going to be gone for the holiday as well. So what they do is when a lender locks in a consumer interest rate. So if you're a consumer right now, if you're the end user, you're getting your mortgage and you lock that loan in with the lender is oftentimes promising that loan forward, and they're promising to deliver it to a security pool at a particular negotiated rate. And they need to protect themselves as well. And when they are, if they give you a lock on Wednesday, they have to worry about that being, Thursday, Friday into Monday. What's going to happen to those markets? Are they going to lose money before they have a chance to lock that loan forward? And that's why a lot of lenders tend to be a little conservative on that Wednesday before the holiday, because new loans that come in can sometimes be locked in the computer system, and there's not a human who handles that next level where they say, okay, we're going to manage what they call their hedging, and they actually look at when they're going to sell that loan forward. So because of that, Wednesdays, the Wednesday before the holiday may not be the best day to lock in, is kind of where I'm going with it. And of course, there's never a bad day, and as a consumer, you don't want to overplay your hand and look for, we're not going to see 3 1/4 turn into 3 3/4. You're not going to see 3 1/4 turn into 3 1/2. What you may see is that your closing costs get a little bit more expensive, or maybe they get a little bit cheaper, depending on what day you're able to lock in and what the lender is able to help you with as far as what we call a lender rebate. So, but if you've got loans closing between now and the end of the month, I would consider locking them in. The week is not off to a great start right now. We saw Friday, actually, things got a little bit better, and they started the day really well because there was a lot of concern in Europe about COVID, and Austria taking some very draconian measures. And again, I want to avoid controversial topics, and COVID is a controversial topic, but the how COVID has a reaction on our markets and on our interest rates, not so controversial. So in Austria, they were locking things down, which is bad for the economy. And the European markets were very concerned about that. So they were investing their money into our bonds for safety. And that kind of helped out mortgage rates Friday morning. But then as the day went on, we kind of lost some of that ground. And heading into this morning, further losing that ground. So that was those are some things. The other thing that arguably is not favorable to better interest rates is that this morning President Biden did tag current Fed Chair Jerome Powell to run another 4-year. He did tag him and say, hey, would you, we'd like you to run another 4-year session. And that's when a president appoints a Fed chair, it is for 4 years. It is good, does go into the next president's term. And that'll have to be approved through Congress, but it's very unlikely that would be a problem. But Powell, who, by the way, I'm a huge Powell fan. I think he's done a great job navigating the COVID crisis, the financial crisis with that. And
Mm-hmm.
he has what they call a more hawkish tone. They use two birds when it comes to the Fed. They talk about doves and they talk about hawks. And a hawkish tone means less monetary stimulus, and that he's more likely to push for rates to go up a little bit because slow things down, slow down inflation, and to keep things kind of level keel. Whereas the other front runner was a current Fed governor, Lael Brainerd, who she tends to be more dovish, and dovish is more accommodative, meaning they want to pump more money into the system. They don't want to necessarily raise rates as quickly, maybe slow down that tapering. And markets tend to like that, but it's kind of like it's unpolitically correct, but it's kind of like, being a kid and eating candy. Just because everybody likes it doesn't mean it's good for them. So the Fed really loves that idea of all this monetary, stimulus and all this accommodative policy, but it's really not good for the economy right now. Which we see in inflation. We see all these effects now because of the decisions that were made during the last couple of years coming home to roost, and that's driving up the supply chain issues and all of that, which has been pushing up inflation. So anyway, we shouldn't see too much of a move for the next couple of weeks, but if you've got a loan closing longer term than that, don't panic. We're certainly not going to see rates move up very far from here, but it's probably the next week or so may not be the best time to lock in your interest rate unless you're closing soon and you want to make sure that you're locked for protection.
Right, exactly. So one of the things we should talk about, and maybe mark this down in the next call, is to talk more about the backside of water, if you will. Coming back from Disneyland and the Jungle Cruise, that's on the top of my mind. But let's talk about the backside of water and being the interest rate and kind of what drives the interest rate from the secondary desk. You mentioned it, and you said, look, your rate may be a little bit more expensive, or you may get a little bit more credit at your closing, but we're not looking at rates going from 3.25 to, or 3 to 3.25. We're not looking at the massive swings on a interest rate number, but we're looking at the cost of the interest rate is when we talk about that volatility of the swing and what that means. We've kind of tapped on it a little bit in the past. I think maybe we should spend a little more detail talking about yield spread premium and what drives those rates and where those dollars SRP and where that's coming from, and what when somebody says, and I see this a lot in our group, and I'll say this specifically for Veta VA, people come in and go, how can I get an interest rate and have zero closing costs? Well, the first misnomer there is that there's zero closing costs. That's not true. Nobody does a loan for free ever, ever, ever. Right. However, there are ways to pay for the closing costs that do not require you to take dollars out of your wallet and say, here's my cash. There are ways for you to finance the closing costs through the interest rates and the lender credit you get back, or seller concessions, etc. So I think maybe taking a look at secondary desk and talking a little bit more about that would be really good. So maybe we'll add that, tickle that for Monday, and look at kind of what happened this last shorter week that we're in right now, heading into Thanksgiving, while we're all hopefully eating delicious Thanksgiving meals on Thursday and eating all the leftovers on Friday. That's one of my favorites, and heading into the weekend. So with that, I know you're going to be monitoring. I'll be monitoring any kind of tags or comments on here, but please do put your comments down, your questions. We'll address them next week or live in session just on the page, and happy to have these conversations. Hammer, I'm super thankful that you make time for us to talk every week. So appreciate you very much, and I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving this week.
Thanks. You too, Nathan. Thanks for having me. Take care, everybody.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.